This this masterpiece was in the film, and just because of that, this is a 5 stars film. Welcome back everyone to another video here on the channel Royal Horror. My name is Thiago. I really hope you're well, and as you read by the title, what we're gonna do today is we're going to talk about the newest superhero film released at the cinemas called Madame Web, directed by S.G. Clarkson. Now, just before we start talking about the positives, the negatives, and the things that will have improved, I just want to say that I went into this film with zero expectations. I was not expecting anything out of this film because honestly, I used to be a big fan of superhero films, of Marvel, DC, all of that, but I think after the pandemic, I'm just kind of lost the interest in superhero films. Obviously, I like rewatching them. I've been watching every single film that has come out in the cinemas when it comes to superheroes, but they don't exactly excite me anymore, if that makes sense. So when this film got announced, I was like, okay, fair enough, like, let's just give this a go, but it was not on my top radar of the 2024 releases. The only few things that I knew about this film is that obviously some of the writers, they wrote Morbius, but I haven't watched Morbius yet. And also some of the writers, they wrote the Power Rangers live action from 2017. And I'm actually a big fan of that film. I think it gives justice to the original series from like the 90s and early 2000s. And I like the visuals of that film, so I was expecting more or less the same. Now, to kick off this review, let's start talking about the negative things and things that will have improved so we can take them out of the way. And unfortunately, I do think there is more negative aspects than positive, although let me just say that I enjoyed this film, but it's not a secret that this film has a lot of faults, if that makes sense. And I think the biggest cons that I will find in this film is that the film itself suffers that it's an origin story, if that makes sense. For example, I know there's gonna be a new film out of this, or maybe like a new trilogy, I don't know. So just because this is the origins of Madame Web, we don't really have enough action sequences with her. We just spend a lot of time with her, discovering her powers, where do they come from, what she has to do with it, what kind of villain she has to face. So we don't really spend time with her as Madame Web. We spend a lot of time with her as a human being. And although I was fine with that, I do think because of the posters and because of the trailers, I was expecting a lot of action with her costume and all of that, but obviously that doesn't really happen. Another con that I will have with this film, I think, is the script. I think the script is not the strongest that I have seen in a superhero film. I think the way the characters are written is not really the strongest, apart from Madame Web. I think her character by herself, she was quite strong, like she felt like a human being, the stuff that she was saying, and just her personality overall. I think she was a really well done written character, but what's around her is not really a really well written script, if that makes sense. Because for example, the teenage girls, the way they are written, like they are fine, but they are really cliche, if that makes sense. Like we get to have 3 teenage girls and all of them, they come across, and obviously every single one of them, they have parents issues. So like that's their personality basically. You don't really get to know a lot about them, or like what are their hobbies, what do they like, what they don't like. The only thing we know is their trauma. And also like the only Latina character, the Latina actress, she had to have an immigration issue with her father, but I wish we got to know more about these characters because obviously they are huge in the storyline by themselves and also in the upcoming films. Now, I think one of the biggest cons that I have with this film is the opening. I think the way the opening is edited is so bad, just because it has a lot of weird zooms out of nowhere, like you know, for example, in Modern Family, the way that the way that show is edited is like that. Like, you know, when the characters are talking to the camera and out of nowhere there is a huge zoom and then a zoom out. That this movie is edited like that, and I don't really know why. I guess my last con that I have with this film is obviously the storyline by itself. I think it's very cliche, I'm not gonna lie. Like, we have seen this film before. There is literally nothing new about it. We have a human being, and that human being, she used to be a normal human being. She used to be a paramedic. She used to live in her own flat in New York. Like, is there any more cities in the whole world apart from New York? Maybe not, because every single film takes place in New York. And also, I wished Madame Web could have had more action sequences between the villain and Madame Web. And even though we didn't, because obviously this is an origin story, so it didn't make so much sense if she got her costume and all of that. But if you compare, for example, this film to the first Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire, I think that film, like, the film had a lot of space and a lot of time to develop itself with its own character. Because Tobey Maguire, he was a normal guy, he got the superpowers, he learned about them, and he even got his own costume, he had a strong villain, you know what I mean? So that's where Madame Web is suffering, that the movie spends a lot of time with herself, trying to develop her powers or trying to understand her powers, that we don't really have time to understand the villain, or when they come across, we don't really care what happens to either of them. Because compared to the first Spider-Man, you spend a lot of time in the film, like you have a lot of time to breathe with the characters, with the villain, with the scenes, with the scenarios. Like, that film is almost a perfect film if you ask me. Now let's start with the positive aspects about this film, because I do think this film has a lot of positive things to talk about. I think this film, it really works for like a teenage audience, let's say from 15 to 18 years old, or even younger than 15. Another really positive, I think this is the strongest positive aspect that I have about Madame Web. I think that will be, and it might be a contrast to my negative point about the storyline, but I do think Madame Web is such a unique and original character that I honestly haven't seen before, because she sees the future, and the way she sees the future is very unique when it comes to superhero films. And I like that she felt real. I like that she really struggled to understand the superpowers, because she doesn't know where they're coming from, and she doesn't know what to do with them. She wished she could take them away, but she really can't do that. And honestly, I have to say, the way the movie is edited, when she's having the visions and when her superpowers are in action, I like that editing. I think it was super fun and super entertaining, and I think without that editing, I think this would have been so boring. This might be just a me thing, because I'm a huge horror fan, and obviously because you know me, Final Destination is my favorite horror franchise of all time. Final Destination 3 is in my top 3 horror movies of all time. So the fact that this film felt like a Final Destination film, because obviously it takes place in 2003, and you know, like the first 3 films of Final Destination, they take place in the early 2000s. So obviously there is a lot of vibes with Final Destination. And I also really like the wardrobe. I think it looked very 2000, the hair, the soundtrack. Like, there is one scene, and that brings me to my next positive point, is that the few action sequences that we have with the superpowers, they were really entertaining, and I think people are not giving credit to these scenes, because they're really fun to watch, and they are the scenes that make me wanna rewatch this film and maybe even own it, if that makes sense. I think the scene at the train where Madame Web, she's sitting down and she starts to develop her superpowers with the other 3 teenage girls, I think that was so well edited and so well entertaining. I really found myself having a good time at the cinemas while watching this scene. And also the scene where she's going to the bar, like the cafeteria where the girls are there. And I think the way that was edited, it was super fun too, especially because obviously Toxic by Britney Spears is playing while all of that is happening. I don't know why, but I just found myself super entertained with those scenes. Just to conclude this review, I will recommend this film. I think everyone has to have their own time at the cinemas. I'm not really someone that says don't go and watch this movie at the cinemas, because everyone can do whatever they want to do. So just overall, Madame Web felt just a very overall average in the middle kind of film. There's nothing more, it's nothing less. It's just right there, but obviously with more cons than pros, if that makes sense. Because if there is not a next film, let me just say it like this shouldn't just have been made if there is not gonna be a second film, because at the end of the credits, after what happens with her and after the whole climax comes, we obviously get to discover something that happens to her eyes. I'm not gonna go into details. And then we see the costumes and all of that, but that's it, and we don't really see any much about it. So I hope it's because a new film is coming out where we get to see action sequences with them as Madame Web and the other Spider Girls, because if we don't get to see that, That would be really dumb. So that was it. That was my review, and this film is brand new, so let's see how this movie goes. But although I'm reviewing this film after a day of watching it, and this film is already standing in a 1.9 on Letterboxd and on a 22% on Rotten Tomatoes and on a 3.8 on IMDb. So I don't really have hope for this film. I think this is gonna be a huge flop. I think people are gonna really hate this film. People are already hating it, but I think it's because people are comparing it to Morbius, which I haven't seen. So that's why I enjoyed my time in this film, because I haven't seen Morbius, which is another Sony product, superhero Sony product. So we will see when I watch this film. So if you have watched this film, please let me know in the comment section below. If you are interested on watching this film, please let me know in the comment section below. I really hope you have a nice end of the week. We will talk soon. See you in the next video. Bye bye.